Hello and welcome to Study with Sudhir. This is your digital classroom. My name is Sudhir. We are going to be studying the Darkling Thrush, written by poet and novelist Thomas Hardy. This is a very complex poem. So let me say that right at the outset, which is why we are going to be doing it in two parts. The first two stanzas in part 1 and the third and the fourth stanza and the thematic analysis of the poem in the second part. Please keep a notebook and pen with you so that you can take down notes. Understand the poem first and then take down notes. So you may need to go through the video a couple of times in order to understand the poem. As I said, it's complex, not complicated, but complex, which is a stage higher than complicated. Now, just to tell you a bit about the poem. Now, this poem was originally called The Century's End 1900. That was the original title of this poem and was first printed on the 29th of December 1900. Okay, now, and that was published in a publication called The Graphic. However, later a 1899 manuscript of the same poem was also found, which basically suggested that this poem was written by Thomas Hardy actually at the turn of the century in 1899, but subsequently published only in 1900. Now, what is this poem all about? It's called the Darkling Thrush. The thrush is the name of a bird, and basically it is written in December, as I said, or it is published in December, and that weather element clearly reflects itself in the poem, and it's actually a very strong presence. The poem is also pessimistic. In fact, many people also refer to Thomas Hardy as very pessimistic at heart. And it talks of a very, very lonely and a very desolate kind of scenario. It's not a poem which will kind of uplift you, at least in the first two stanzas. It leaves you with a very brooding kind of a mindset, right? A lack of hope, hopelessness in that sense. So, and in the third stanza is when the bird, the thrush, enters the scene singing a song, a beautiful song, which is actually full of hope. More than the beauty of the song lies in the fact that it is singing of hope. And at that point, the poet actually wonders what it actually is trying to convey, what its larger meaning is. And as we go to the fourth stanza, we realize that the bird is a symbol of the hopes that a new century, the birth of a new century, that is the 20th century, actually suggests and indicates, right? So, we'll study in the first two stanzas about what is really the meaning of all the metaphors and the similes and the words, and rather complicated words used by Thomas Hardy in the first two stanzas convey. What are they trying to convey? Also, I was going through an article written in the Guardian newspaper of the UK, and it described this particular poem as one of Thomas Hardy's most lyrical poems, which is musical in execution, metaphor, theme, and title. Okay, that's how the Guardian newspaper described this particular poem. The darkling refers to the darkness, essentially in the dark. And there is also, if you go through the poem, I will of course touch upon it, but it's also very interesting in the manner in which he has used certain alphabets to emphasize, which I found as a reader very, very interesting. For instance, in the second stanza, you will find several words actually starting with the letter C. So when there is an emphasis on a particular alphabet, it kind of gives it a particular kind of a thrust. Century, crypt, cloud canopy, so corpse, those are all different words which are all starting with C and have a particular kind of a tonality to it. Okay. Also, the poem gives the impression, as I said, that he is a pessimist, but there is also a belief, and I have been going through a lot of critical analysis of this poem in order to be able to understand it and explain it better so that you get a more quality kind of an analysis and interpretation. Many people believe that the thrush may actually be also a reference to Thomas Hardy himself, that he may not be so much of a pessimist. So there is a kind of different schools of thought on how they interpret Thomas Hardy himself. In fact, Thomas Hardy is the mayor of Casterbridge, was part of our first year in college when I was doing English literature in Delhi University. So, familiar with Thomas Hardy's works. So let's start with the first stanza. As I said, listen to this carefully because there are a lot of new words you would have never heard in your life before. It says, I leant upon a coppice gate. Okay, leant as in, it's kind of coming from the word leaning, you're leaning, and when you are leaning, it kind of suggests, when you lean, you're actually moving your body forward. So it suggests a certain kind of a posture and also body language. When frost was spectre grey and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day, the tangled vine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. Now, basically what he is saying, the simple meaning, let's go to the simple meaning of these particular lines. He is saying that I was leaning upon a gate, which is basically a path which is leading into a forest area. The frost, which is referring to in the second sentence of the first stanza, frost was grey in color, and we will come to a detailed analysis of this word frost, what it conveys in just a bit. Its color was grey, right? And winter's dregs. Now, the winter day made the sun look very dull. The sun is usually associated with a lot of energy, positivity, but here it was looking dull because of the effect of the frost and the effect of the winter season. Okay, spectre grey is also looking almost grey as a ghost. The winter day was making the sun look very dull and bleak. The tangled vine stems scored the sky is basically a reference to the tangled stems of these climbing plants, the creepers, right, which climb on any building or any wall or any other tree, etc. So they had actually, the leaves were not there, so it was only the stems which are there, and they resembled the strings of a broken musical instrument. The broken instrument is the lyre again, which is something important, and we'll come to that in a bit. And all the people, all mankind that haunted nigh, all the people who lived in the neighborhood, that all gone back home to the warmth of their homes where a fire was lit, the household fires. So that's the basic, very elementary understanding of the first stanza. Now let's look at the specific words as to what the words mean, and I would request you to note it down. Coppice gate. Coppice is basically a grove, you know, of small trees or shrubs. Okay, something similar, I mean not exactly the same, you would see in public gardens and public lawns, etc., where the gardener would kind of trim the shrubs in such a way that they almost form a thicket of sorts, right, almost to convey a passage in the garden. So this is basically maintained by periodic cutting or pruning. I'm sure you'd get the meaning now. So it's basically a kind of a mini forest which the gardeners or the foresters regularly cut back in order to stimulate the growth. So because once they are pruned, it will actually stimulate the growth process of these shrubs, right? So that is the reference to the coppice gate, and he's leaning upon it. Dregs is the remnants. Essential meaning is that it's the remnants of a liquid when you are drinking and there is something left at the bottom, that's left, that is referred to as dregs, right? It's left in any container together with any kind of sedimentary material, but here it is associated, he has very cleverly and very smartly and very intelligently used it with winter. That is, it's the month of December when the winter is there at its peak, but it's kind of also, it's the end of the winter in terms of the calendar year. Also because it is talking about the end of the century, it's also kind of conveying that it is the end of an entire era, entire 19th century. Then we come to the word lyre that I mentioned to you. It's a stringed instrument like a small U-shaped harp with strings fixed to a crossbar, used especially in ancient Greek mythology. And the lyre is the instrument that is associated with Apollo, who is the Greek god of music. So if you just Google and see the figure of Apollo, you would find that he is holding an instrument, and that is referred to as the lyre. It was given to him by Hermes, who was the messenger of the gods. There is a separate story about that, about which we don't need to know as far as this particular poem is concerned. Nigh essentially means nearby, near. Spectre is a ghostly appearing figure, symbolic of something negative, eerie, frightening, scary and close to death. Okay, that's why the ghost. Now, we spoke about frost. Now, what is basically frost? Now, frost is a form of ice. You know of frost-free refrigerators, right? So, in the old time refrigerators, you would have the frost kind of getting formed inside the refrigerator, and you need to keep on defrosting it. Now you get frost free refrigerators. Those kind of ice does not get formed inside the refrigerator. So the frost is a kind of ice that is formed in cold weather, and it is not considered good for vegetation, for the plant life, because when it falls on the shrubs or which are plants of low height, not on the trees but on plants of low height, it damages both the stem as well as the leaves, and quite often even kills them. Now when the speaker is talking about the spectre grey, what is he trying to say? Frost that basically is kind of denoting the winter weather and the winter landscape. He is basically talking about the harshness of the season of the weather in the month of December, and in that sense the spectre grey is symbolic of death, of decay. Okay, and in that sense he is talking about the death of the plants, he is also talking about the death of the year, he is also talking about the death of the century itself, right? So many connotations as a result of being denoted by that those two words. So what is the poet Thomas Hardy essentially saying in the first stanza? The poet is basically painting a rather bleak and a very somber picture of the world, S-O-M-B-R-E, and whatever words I use, I would strongly urge you to make notes and be able to use these words even in your answers. They would elevate the quality of your answers. The mood is extremely lonely, right? It's one of silence. In fact, when you read it itself and just imagine yourself with eyes closed, you will be transported into that kind of a world. That's the power of Thomas Hardy's language and vocabulary. And in that sense, he kind of denotes and signifies a very heavy kind of an atmosphere, almost basically to convey utter sadness and a moment of being very desolate. The speaker uses the word lent, which is a body posture, as I said, suggestive of simply watching what is happening around him. Now in his loneliness, what he has done is he has used the poetic device of personification. And what has he personified? He has personified winter by using the word dregs with it. He has also personified frost. Okay, and also note, it's I found it quite fascinating that he has used, normally frost is something, it's not denoting to a person, but he has used capital letters for frost, not a small case, which is another way of conveying that he is trying to personify frost. Now frost is described as spectre grey or ghost like grey, and the winter's dregs are in the form of fallen snow. You know, they are the remnants of the winter, which is why the word dregs has been used, and they add to the feeling of loneliness because of the extreme chill that they bring about. The extreme, also the effect of the winter is associated with what? With mist, with heavy fog, etc. And they all add to the feeling of being very lonely, devoid of any cheer, extremely bleak and dull, right? Then we come to the tangled vine stems, what we refer to as the creepers that kind of creep upon a wall, a building, a tree, whatever. They are the ones which use in a symbiotic relationship, at least they make use of the other structure in order to climb, right? They are dead. So what you have now is only their stems and they are tangled and intermingled, which is why they look like the strings of broken lyres, and that is not particularly a very pretty sight, because it's the leaves which give life to a plant, in this case a creeper, right? So what Hardy wants to convey through this is that there is both lack of life, there is also lack of music, the reference to the broken strings. Please mark this point, this is very important. So because there is lack of life, there is lack of music, there is lack of happiness and joy, right? This is important, this is an important point. And what is the reaction of the people in the last two sentences of the first stanza? The reaction of the people is that they don't seem to be bothered. They don't seem to be bothered about what is happening around them. So in that sense, there is also a lack of energy, a lack of dynamism in that mankind out there. The word used for mankind is the word haunted, right? Again, the word haunted conveys something negative, it conveys something eerie, right? And because that's not really the way to live life. You know, if you say, oh, he lived a haunted life, it's not really, you're not conveying something very positive, right? they are going back home and taking care of their own household fires. Now, the word fire is important because the fire, just like the sun, is normally associated again with a lot of energy and positivity. But here it kind of conveys a very inward looking and almost a very selfish kind of a mood of this mankind. Okay, they are not, it does not convey energy and dynamism, at least that's not the way Thomas Hardy is trying to use it in this particular stanza. So, just to recap the first stanza, it begins with the speaker leaning against a coppice gate at the dregs, which means at the end of the winter season, of the winter day, or in this sense also the end of the century. And for the speaker, the landscape is absolutely desolate and it kind of leads to a sense of sadness, to a sense of despair, right? It's also normally December 25 is also associated with the Christmas cheer, but here he is not talking about any kind of cheer, right? He is talking about an atmosphere, a mood of absolute desolation, right? And because the year is ending, the century is ending, it is also kind of talking about, in a sense, conveying death and decay at the end of the year. The sun is also weakening. Again, another sign of lack of hope and any kind of positivity. So, in that sense, there is no looking forward to any kind of renewal of life of any kind. Then there is also the comparison, as I said, between the tangled bind stems and the string of the broken lyres. I hope that is clear. The lyre basically conveying music and poetry, and music and poetry, just like the sun and the fire, are another symbol of something which is a little illuminating, enlightening, a kind of it kind of conveys an energy, a joy in the civilization. But because they are broken lyres, it conveys absolutely the opposite, basically to say that the civilization, and in this case many critics have also referred to it as Thomas Hardy's commentary on the decay of the Western civilization, and broken lyres is what is really referring to that he wants to convey that it needs care, it needs attention, and it needs some kind of repair because it has fallen into a sense of disrepair. So that is as far as the first stanza is concerned. I hope this detailed explanation has kind of enlightened you about what Thomas Hardy wants to say. Let's now come to the second stanza. Now, the land's sharp features seem to be the century's corpse outlined. His crypt, the cloudy canopy, the wind, its death lament, the ancient pearls of germ and birth, was shrunken, hard and dry, and every spirit upon earth seemed fervorless as I. Fervorless. Fervor is again a word associated with a lot of energy, but he is saying fervorless. Again to say this is the kind of mood that I am in at this point in time. Again, let's start with the first sentence of the second stanza. Sharp features. Sharp features, in this case, he is talking about land's sharp features. So, what are the land's sharp features? They are mountains, they are hills, they are cliffs, basically anything which have very, very sharp kind of edges, right? The hill peaks, and they are likened by Thomas Hardy in this stanza to the corpse of the 19th century, the century's corpse outlined, as if the dead body is kind of leaning out, right? And also note that in the first stanza also there was a reference to leaned, right, in the first sentence. Here it's outleaned. So Frost conveyed death in the first stanza, but here it's a much more of a direct reference when he is using a very strong word, a very powerful word like corpse, right? The clouds are forming a canopy, third sentence of the second stanza, which is, canopy is what? Canopy is a roof of sorts, you know, it's providing shelter over your head. But in this case, it's almost like a burial place, like a tomb of sorts, because crypt, if you know the meaning of the word crypt, crypt is an underground room or vault beneath a church, and it is used as a burial place. So the wind, it says the wind, its death lament. So the wind is playing a very, very sad song, lamenting over the passing away, basically lamenting over the demise. Then Hardy says that the age-old desire to reproduce, to procreate and bring the next generation into the world also has shrunk. The ancient pearls of Germ and birth was shrunken, hard and dry. Very, very strong language. So he's saying that the age-old desire to procreate and bring the next generation into this world also is no longer existing, and every person on earth seems to be as depressed, as fervorless as I am. Now, let's go into a detailed explanation of this one. The poet is basically talking about the century's corpse because, as I said, it's the end of the 19th century, and therefore the century in this case, just like winter and frost in the first stanza, here the century has been personified as a dead body, as a corpse. Also, this again takes forward the theme of the rough and very harsh winter, right? And that is only kind of underlining and emphasizing the death point much more. And everything around, even the wind for that matter, even the cold wind is becoming almost like a song of death, as though it's kind of whispering and singing about death and decay and demise in the year. And that's again which kind of conveys a mood of loneliness, extreme sadness and brooding. And life also in that sense is no longer in a vibrant kind of a mood. And the poet does not seem very optimistic, which is why I said right at the beginning of this video that many people see this as a very pessimistic phase of Thomas Hardy, that he does not see any kind of optimism, he does not see any kind of future for the world at the end of the 19th century, right? So fervorless basically conveying the meaning of depressed and lacking in any kind of interest. The century is dead, of course, in a literal sense because it's the end of the century. But when you read this second stanza in connection with the first stanza, you realize that the broken lyres that he had spoken about, which to my mind are the most important two words in the first stanza, also suggests something very, very deep, that the culture of the 19th century has also failed in Thomas Hardy's opinion. Okay. He does not go into any kind of reasoning as to why he thinks the century has failed, and many critics have said that it could be because of rampant industrialization, because of which he feels that the rural landscape of Europe and Britain have also changed dramatically, very drastically because of that. But what is more important is what Hardy says in words, that the cycle of birth and death, the ancient pearls of germ and birth, have also ended. Again, this is extremely significant. Shrunken, hard and dry. Very powerful words. So in that sense, Hardy probably wants to convey that it's also a very sharp cultural death and decay. And from there, Thomas Hardy does not seem to see any hope of a rebirth. Okay. The use of the words, and this is something which I found in one particular critical analysis, and I thought it was quite an interesting point which I thought I'll include it here. The words germ and birth are very important because they convey both plant life and animal and human life, because germination, pollination is how the plants kind of grow, right? Birth, animals and humans, mammals give birth to a new being. So he's kind of talking about both plant and animal life when he's talking about and lamenting about the end of the century, the end of the year, and talking about the harshness of the winter as a metaphor to convey what he wants to say. So we will pause over here as far as this particular poem is concerned. We will do the stanza 3rd and 4th, where there is an entry of the bird called the thrush, and what change the bird actually stimulates in Thomas Hardy's own mental outlook is what makes this poem very fascinating. So please join me in part 2 of this particular poem, The Darkling Thrush by Thomas Hardy, which is part of your ISC class 12 English syllabus. Very fascinating, as I said, a very complex poem which you need to understand very well and be able to use many of the words that I have used in order to be able to explain and analyze whatever questions you get in the examination. So I see you in part 2 of this poem's analysis. Thank you very much for watching.